This is Harvard on the Map, presented by the Harvard Graduate School of Design, covering innovative ideas and thought leaders in digital cartography, Earth observation, and all things geospatial, with your host, Jennifer Horowitz.
Hello, and welcome to Harvard on the Map. I'm here with Gupta, Vice President and Head of Automated Mapping at Woven Planet Holdings. It's a pleasure to have you on the program. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so let's get started. So to start, if you could maybe tell our listeners in the Boston area who might not know a bit more about the work that Woven Planet Holdings does. You could tell us about the work you do there and how they sort of fit in within the Toyota family.
Sure. Woven Planet was founded about 1.5 years ago. It is we are the sort of advanced mobility subsidiary of Toyota, and very focused on helping Toyota transform to a much more software-centric mobility company. On the backs of all the history and success of, kind of a more hardware manufacturing-centric vehicle maker. Generally, at a very high level, our mission is to really bring the future of powering safer, more intelligent, human-centered mobility for all. Mobility for all is sort of the common mission and purpose statement that Toyota has had for a long time, but that definition of what that is and what that should be is always evolving. So that's certainly what we also kind of always think about is how should that definition be changing for the future, again, when mobility is much more centric around software and experiences, and not just coupled to buying a car for personal use, although we still believe that will be a major part of the future as well. And so to go level down from that, one of the really biggest enablers and initiatives of being able to deliver on that mission is to build the most programmable vehicles on the planet. And in addition to that, as I said, the most intelligent vehicles on the planet. And that is made possible through a new operating system that Woven Planet is building. We call it ARENE, A-R-E-N-E. And so you can think about it a little bit how, personal devices like phones evolved, that, in the last decade or so, we really started with the software environment, so say something like Android or an ecosystem like that. And then, the companies and developers really focused on maturing that and making that more and more capable with respect to the underlying infrastructure, and also really amazing applications on top of it. And we've seen many, many different types of hardware from many different companies adopt that operating system, right? And so, we've seen sort of a Cambrian explosion of all these amazing experiences then that users like you and me get to enjoy because of that. So there's a little bit of an analogy to our kind of strategy to make the most programmable vehicles as well, so that we can take full advantage of the power of software-defined architectures, where the hardware can adapt to them. You can constantly update and improve the software. You can make it much, much easier for yourself, for partners, for developers to build really powerful experiences and applications on your operating system. And then the last thing I'll say is one of those kind of applications that are both being built on top of ARENE, but also helping to power the next generation of automated driving and safety is my division, which is automated mapping. And we can go into, I guess that's kind of a theme of your show, but the kind of mapping we do is pretty unique and distinct to this use case, as opposed to, say, the maps you and I may use as just consumers from our phone. But yeah, but the short of it is maps are kind of a critical intelligence layer to support both the development of applications on top of an operating system like Irene, but also specifically to support automated driving and autonomy for future generations of Toyota's teammate and advanced drive programs.
Well, I'm fascinated to dig into that a little bit more. I have a lot of questions off of that, but I'll stick to my pre-approved list. So to start, Woven does such interesting work. Take us through your professional journey.
There's probably a long story, but I'll and a short one. Maybe I'll choose a meaty one.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, the short of it is, I came to join Woven Planet through one of several acquisitions that Woven has done over the past year. Woven has grown very fast in the past year or so. Both just through hiring all around the world. We have offices in Japan and the UK, all across the US, and all of them have grown a lot, more than doubled in the past year. And some of those have been through acquisitions. One of those was the acquisition of Carmera, a high definition mapping startup that I co-founded in 2015. And so we had actually worked with the predecessor organization of Woven Planet, something called TRID, which is another sort of Toyota subsidiary. We had worked with them as partners before the acquisition, and so we got to know each other very well, and had a very technical, a very congruent technical philosophy and focus. So that was the story behind that. I guess my interest in the actual space of maps and automated driving and all of that. I think some of it is from some of my academic work, as an undergraduate in the 90s. And that was when just some of these enabling technologies were just starting to show some promise, but were also still very theoretical, so that, that they weren't really used yet for any real commercial applications. But, these are like machine learning and computer vision, neural networks. I was also in a program where we were designing autonomous mobility systems. Again, and this is in the late 90s, so it was pre-feature forward type of stuff. But that, I think, certainly intrigued me at an impressionable age about what might be possible in the future. And then, as I said, 15 years later is when we started Carmera. But then I also think a lot of it, especially also, by the way, the interest in joining a institution like Toyota that is really fairly unique in just how globally diverse its presence is, and really how the for all part of that, the mobility for all statement, is really, I think, uniquely served by Toyota in terms of where in the world, including developing countries and areas that may not be as mature in terms of some of the infrastructure for roads and things like that. That I think very much resonated with me. I come from India. I was born there, developing country. Spent some time living in other parts of the developing world, and I think you tend to develop an extra appreciation for infrastructure,
Sure.
Especially roads, by the way, because you don't take them for granted like you might if you're just used to very functional, highways and roads wherever you are. And so I think, kind of growing up in India at an early age, also losing a family member to a car crash, which with today's technology, would have been preventable. Actually, our CEO has a very similar story as well. I think all of those things from a very early age probably subconsciously contributed to an interest in both the technical problem space, but also I think the ethos and mission of Toyota and Woven in terms of building technology that is truly meant for all, not just for sort of niche audiences. So
that's really powerful. Well, it seems like I'm in a library right now, but I'm actually in Israel for a family wedding. Most of my family is here, and every taxi car has there's a company called Mobileye, which is an Israeli
Sure.
company, and every taxi they're required by law to, as they change lanes, they have a whole sensor system. You can't even ignore it. It's amazing how much, and especially in a country that similarly to India has such, a crazy driving style. It's a you see how necessary it is. Yeah, well, it's very powerful to hear your journey. Takes us into our next question. Where do you see as some of the obstacles to vehicle-based autonomous mapping in terms of implementing and also within a safety perspective?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest one, like the biggest sort of conundrum, but also I think tractable problem that we're very much working on is there's kind of a balance. So basically, let me give you some more background
Sure.
on maps and how they're used. So um, typically they're called HD maps, although I'll in a second I'll kind of put a little bit of a nuance on that. But high definition maps was a term coined, probably 15 years ago to just distinguish essentially maps that are meant for machines as opposed to what we call standard definition maps that humans use for navigation or looking up a restaurant or whatever, right? And so these HD maps, initially they've been actually a lot of it come off out of essentially the surveying industry, where almost like typically like terrestrial surveying vehicles, like you would see a Google Street View vehicle, those kinds of things, have been able to build very high fidelity, three-dimensional, spatially accurate, essentially models, recreations of the roads that automated vehicles drive on, and those maps then they have they're, like I said, very detailed. They would include features that the maps that you and I use wouldn't need, like lane level detail, where a stop line is down to 10, 20 centimeters, every sign, etc. So and so what that's been used for in automated driving is really an additional source of knowledge to aid with localizing the vehicle correctly, to just to make sure it knows exactly where it is, to kind of be a redundant, almost like a fourth sensor, it's often called. So in addition to sensors like cameras and radars and lidars, if the vehicle has those, the map can act as another source of knowledge of, well, is there really a yield sign there? The other three sensors said yes, and so did the map. Great, we could be confident, that kind of thing. And then also for planning, it's very helpful for both kind of short range motion planning and longer range path planning to have a map, especially a map that has line of sight beyond your sensors, so it knows what's ahead around the corner before you've even turned and miles away. And so planning out your movements, obviously having a very detailed map is useful for all of those things. However, those very detailed maps are fairly tough to scale at that level of density and fidelity. As I said, they really came out of surveying techniques, which work okay for certain road classes. But I think that one of the biggest challenges that the industry, including us and our partners we work with, are facing is how do you scale that out to not just, let's say, highways and maybe one or two road classes beyond that, but really all roads. And just to give you a sense of that challenge, let's say in a country like the US, when you're talking about the major limited access highways, it's on the order of hundreds of thousands of miles. But then when you're talking about really all roads that you and I would drive on in a given month or year, you're talking in the millions. So you're talking somewhere around 3 million or so miles of road. And so that's a lot of zeros,
Sure.
of difference.
Yeah.
And so, certain techniques of not just map creation, but also map maintenance just don't scale out to all those additional orders of magnitude of road that you have to cover. So I think that's the challenge is how do you still take full advantage of what the map is able to provide in terms of the safety and reliability value that the map provides to the technology, the perception planning technology I mentioned, but in a way that you can actually scale that map out to everywhere you'd want to drive. And so we can talk about this in more detail if you like, but one of the main concepts that we're working on related to that is the concept of a medium definition map. Is kind of the term we use, or MD map, because we do think that there is a so-called Goldilocks, kind of level of fidelity, where especially because the the in-vehicle software and AI is continuing to improve. So let's say some of the features that were in an HD map 5 years ago, and some of the fidelity and accuracy that you needed may actually not be as needed today or in 5 years from now, because the procession systems are so much better, the machine learning, the planning has improved so much. However, those maps are still very, very valuable for a lot of reasons. So you don't want to to not leverage them either. And so this concept of MD, or medium definition, is okay, so how can we converge to something that is somewhere between a standard definition map that humans have always used and these very high definition maps that came out of surveying, that can extend to those 3 million miles of road in the US, and in other countries it's obviously even more. And really this also assumes that you're going to be leveraging crowdsourcing to collect that data from vehicles and other sources, to really be able to extend to all those miles of road. So all of that is baked into this challenge of the right level of fidelity, but with the requirements for ubiquity in terms of all those all that coverage. And then the last piece also being freshness. So things change. And so it's not just the challenge of mapping all those millions of miles of road, but then how do you maintain the map so it's fresh when new lane paint shows up or a new sign is installed. So I'll pause there, but that's I would say the number one kind of long-term challenge that we're all sort of driving towards.
Well, that works perfectly as a feed into my next question, which is how important that rate of refresh you see is, and how that issue is tackled.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first off, when it comes to safety, I should mention that a safety case for any vehicle, and certainly, at Toyota, I mean, Toyota's just really become synonymous for quality and safety, reliability. So, no safety case is going to be like dependent on something like freshness of a map, because you need a very, very robust safety case that assumes that the map could be wrong, or there's you don't get the update because of a connection issue or whatever, right? So that and that's already true of I would say the vetted and deployed automated driving systems that are already on the road, including from Toyota. Toyota's by the way, the program that Toyota that uses or is called within Toyota is called Toyota Teammate. Although I think the brand name in the US, like if you bought a Lexus with this technology, it's called Advanced Drive. So Advanced Drive, a system like that, which just came out in certain Lexus models in the US, and also the Toyota Mirai in the last year or so. That system also it uses an HD map, but the technology in the vehicle for the automated driving features can still operate and or inform the driver that it's disengaging if there is any issue with map quality or freshness, right? And so I just want to make that clear that we don't expect to change, because that's just the right safety case to have.
Sure.
So it's really, when you ask about freshness and how important it is, it's, we see it as more kind of moving up the ladder a bit to not necessarily safety, but user experience, because one thing that a lack of map freshness can very much affect is the disengagement rate of the automated driving feature. So, it's very common and for these systems, for if there is a if it is sensed that the map is not accurate with what's really being reflected in the driving conditions, it's common to kind of turn off a section of road for that automated driving feature. So again, that's the right safety policy, but obviously if that's happening all the time, it's not a great experience for the user. And so I think that is one area where freshness can make a big difference. And I think also the experience can be in a number of ways. Like, you can think about it in a number of facets. One is just knowing that the automated driving feature is generally going to be enabled most of the time, because the maps are up to date, and so that's that's in and of itself obviously a good thing. But also others, like the smoothness of the ride. So, like, knowing that, and this also is dependent obviously on the in-vehicle human machine interaction, sort of the HMI as we call it, experience. Excuse me. But just also knowing that even if there is a disengagement, where typically there's some visual and auditory kind of warnings of, hey, you need to take back over, that those will still be done in a kind of a UX graceful way, and won't be, again, you're not going to have to deal with that all the time because of map freshness issues. And then finally, also, I think freshness becomes very relevant when it comes to things like ETA. So, you may, like, if you're being routed around a section of like a road that is not up to date, that may be okay. But if that's happening a lot, that can affect the ideal route that you want to take to get somewhere, and the time it takes to get there. So that's another example of a user experience element that is often quite related to something like an up-to-date map.
Well, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts in terms of, as someone who's worked within this space since undergrad, really, I wonder where you see the most exciting developments or an increase in development or investment within research within automated mapping. What do you see as the most exciting, and what will help drive the way for the autopilot experience and just safer mapping-based driving?
Yeah, actually, we just did a kind of a talk on this in the UK a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that a map, well, first off, I think part of the answer to your question is what I've already said, that challenge, of developing what I called an MD map is also very exciting, and I think will open up an enormous amount of value in terms of, again, the for all ethos, and like just really opening up the domain for this technology and for the safety benefits of this technology. So that's incredibly exciting, and I think part of that is also because, for the reasons I gave before about what the map is doing for the the perception and planning technology in the vehicle, but also the other P, we always think about the 3 Ps, is prediction, and prediction is kind of a neighbor of of perception, I'd say. But prediction tends to obviously more, it's fundamentally very dynamic, right? You're trying to predict what the ego vehicle is, that just means the one you're essentially driving.
Okay, your
and
ego
other
vehicle
agents
is yours. Okay.
Yeah, basically, yeah, exactly. It's like the first person, when we talk about this, and then other agents. So that would be like second second person, third person, you know.
Okay,
So
got it. Yeah.
like, let's say another vehicle that you're deciding whether to let them go or turn, or bicyclists or pedestrians, etc. So the other agents. So when you're thinking about prediction for those, it's really also very useful, first off, to have an MD map, or really any map, to be able to test your prediction and behavior models, because the map gives you a scaffolding that lets you understand, like, let's just take an example. So let's say you really want to understand and predict how other agents, you know, as I said, they could be other vehicles, they could be bicyclists, will tend to behave when you are about to, you know, you're starting to slow down, maybe take an unprotected left turn in, you know, let's say some city in the US. Well, so first off, there's a lot of value of just seeing a lot of those examples, right? So that's one of the things that is also very exciting, especially being a part of the Toyota group, because the distribution of Toyota vehicles and sensing allows us to sort of safely capture and seize many examples of those turns, and therefore train our models, our machine learning, our prediction models, to really know how people safely navigate a maneuver like that, right? Mm-hmm. But it's much more powerful if you can model those behaviors on a map, because the map is giving you additional information at lane level about exactly what that turn looks like, what the rules of the road are that is that kind of maneuver is based on, what other parts of the road and lanes the other agents, like I said, there's other vehicles, there's other bicyclists, pedestrians, etc. What they're navigating. So it gives you this context that you need to really develop a very robust behavioral prediction model. And so I think that is very exciting for both us. I think that's a feature space where we in our mapping division are increasingly also supporting a lot of the work going on within Woven there. And I think it's also just generally a, we call it we've termed it internally the BMOD, behavioral model of driving, just sort of the concept of kind of knowing, not just, like I said, not just in Mountain View, but in all the places people drive. And, again, Toyota is so uniquely distributed in that way all around the world, to really understand how an average person drives in very diverse places, and to use that to, in kind of the technology is very exciting, because I think, one of the beliefs we have is that automated driving and human powered driving will coexist for a long time. And because of that, it's very powerful and beneficial to have automated driving technology that actually kind of mimics what a typical human, like how humans typically drive. Because actually, when you have those two things coexisting, the automated systems behaving like a human would is actually much better than, even like, let's say, like I take a turn and I take it in just kind of a naturalistic human way, as opposed to a very geometric robotic way. Sure. You could argue like, oh, actually the geometric way is actually, better for a number of reasons, but no, you actually want me to take that turn in a way that other people would expect an average normal driver to take that turn, because you want to be predictable. That's the key, right? Even if you're an automated system, you want to drive in a way that's as predictable and almost as boring as possible to other drivers on that road, instead of something that just very unintuitive. So that's, I think, ultimately the goal of this behavioral model of driving, is that we can see how an average so-called boring driver anywhere around the world really does navigate roads, and we can leverage that understanding in our own automated systems.
Well, thank you for the clarification on some of the terminology, whether that was the HD Latin maps or the medium level definition maps. I'm going to add that to the lecture notes, or sorry, the show notes. I'm not in lecture anymore. It's the summer, but it felt like a lecture in a good way. I am BMOD. I'll also add that. So I have my second to last question before we finish. I'm asking partly on a personal level, but I think it'll also be interesting to listeners who are also at university themselves. I'm a computer science student, but I imagine a lot of the problems that you're discussing are problems that deal with massive amounts of training data sets in order to create really sophisticated programs. And I wonder if you stay abreast of the changes and what's happening in your field. When you want to learn about what's exciting or new within computer vision, for example, are you going to, CVPR, for example, or reading, or are you reading certain journals to just stay abreast of what's happening in that field? I'd just be curious. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. CVPR. We, at Carmera, we used to often send one or two folks, and then now at Woven, there's, I think a whole contingent that typically goes. That just happened, right? In New Orleans or something. Yeah. So actually, I haven't gotten the readout yet from our group of folks who attended yet, but I'm very I always like to get a nice synthesis of all the latest and greatest and anything that we should pay attention to. So yeah, CVPR is certainly one of the ones. SIGGRAPH is another. Sure. Often have people attending. I've lost track, actually, to be honest. I'm sure there's some other really amazing events and conferences, maybe some that came out of virtual COVID times too, that but I probably am not as up to date as I used to be on them. But yeah, the short answer is absolutely. We send folks there. We try to encourage also giving back and publishing. Sure. We've done that. Like when we were an independent startup at Carmera, we were fairly engaged in the academic community, and we're able to put out some interesting papers ourselves. And then certainly at Woven, that's very much encouraged. James Kuffner, our CEO, he'd be too humble to go on about it, but he has a very, very robust pedigree of publishing and being well known in kind of the academic and research world from his time at places like Stanford and Carnegie Mellon, and his involvement in some of the early DARPA work. So and so I think that ethos is also very much encouraged at Woven Planet today, which I think is great.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So my final question, which I ask all of my interviewees, I could keep you here all day. I have a bunch of follow-up questions, but I won't, because I know you're a busy guy. So at the end of my interview, I ask all my interviewees, given the geo theme of the show, to describe a time where you were lost, whether that was physically in person or metaphorically within your life or career, and how you found your way back again.
Wow. Coming up with the that's a
you can
that's
take time too.
Yeah. Well, the physically one is probably easier to answer, but I mean, I almost kind of want to test myself to answer it a little bit more figuratively. I mean, I think actually, here's what I'll say is I think, you asked me earlier about how I kind of gravitated to this industry and everything, and it wasn't a straight line. So it may have sounded like, I mentioned the startup that I co-founded in 2015, and then I mentioned that I was involved in some of this work in the 90s, in my undergrad years. Yeah. But it's not like there was a straight line from that to, to 2015.
Sure, yeah.
And so I think, just like any young person going out into the, into the working world, I started in management consulting, like when oftentimes, when you're young and you don't know really what you want to do with your life, and these folks come to campus to recruit, it's an enticing career. And it was actually, I did learn a lot from that, but and then I did a few other things, and I don't know that I would say I felt lost, in the early part of my career, but I definitely feel like, in those early days, I was optimizing for, just keep the aperture as wide as possible, learn as much as possible. Consulting was just interesting because, I got to like at a very senior level of some of these large companies, got to learn about, how decisions are made, how strategy is created and executed in like 7 different industries in 2 or 3 years, all like very important industries for how the world works. So that was, I think, intentional and good. But, ultimately, I think it's good to sort of open doors and keep the aperture wide open early on. But I also think it's good to kind of really start to find, what you're, what really is drawing you in and what, problems in the world and problem spaces that, really, really speak to you and that you can kind of like, really be an expert on. And actually, this is one of the things that I use as a heuristic is when I started to really gravitate more into first technology, and then my prior startup was actually not in mobility, but had a pretty big data element to it. But I'd always been interested in mobility, transportation, but kind of like when I was thinking about starting Carmera, I did not consider myself, a mapping expert nor an autonomous vehicles expert, but I'd had some grounding in it. But I kind of set myself this little bit of a, I guess you could call it a mental map, which is, I think even just by next month, I can probably go from the, in the top, let's say 100,000 smartest people on these subjects in the world to the top 10,000 people, or maybe sometime in this next year, just by like low hanging fruit of like talking to a lot of people who are smart, reading books, reading a lot. I think just that order of magnitude I should be able to do. And then in the next year, I should be able to go from in the top 10,000 smartest to the top 1,000 smartest. And so sort of like, and that's based on kind of really going down the rabbit hole, actually starting to build products, actually like getting feedback loops, really, really internalizing the technology stack. And so I think in terms of like, that was like I said, it's almost like a mental map for me. It's like, okay, it's okay to kind of start as still a relative layperson to anything. But if you can chart a course to go from, hey, and of course these are arbitrary numbers, but you know what I mean? Like, if you can chart a course to go from, even if it's you're only in the top 1,000,000 or 100,000, most intelligent about this topic,
Sure.
There you can absolutely see a path to then chopping off at 0 every year or whatever, every couple of years, until, you really feel like you can make a strong case that you're, in the top 1,000 folks who really are really knowledgeable about a certain area of subject matter. And so I think that's kind of the, that's kind of what I use to go down this path of, feeling like we could really develop a brain trust around this, and initially at Carmera, and now Woven Planet, and truly be, one of the leaders in the world at understanding this technology and what we need to do to, to make it, to power the future of mobility for all.
Well, thank you for sharing. I'd like to think that I'm sort of trying to do that here by talking with you. And I think that there's you'd be surprised, I think, how few people bother to, read about certain subjects or dive in deeply, or just to read the Wikipedia page on some technical topic, or, go back to the documentation if you're doing more software engineering work and really reading it fully to understand. I very much resonate with that.
And I also say, to the extent you can get your hands on some primary sources early on, it's always, I think derivative sources are okay, are often useful too, but I think, really stretching your thinking to, the term first principles is used very freely these days, but that, but just kind of, thinking about things as clean sheet as possible from the very beginning, I think is also kind of a healthy exercise to do.
Sure.
And as you were saying, it's so much easier now than it was, 5, 10, 15 years ago. It's just right at our fingertips. And so you can just go a long way, even in, a 2-hour internet rabbit hole.
It's true. The internet is amazing. It's true.
Yeah.
Well, Thank you so much. This was so powerful. The Woven Planet Holdings work is just incredibly interesting, especially within the context of Toyota. And it was a pleasure to have you on the program. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for inviting us.